So in this lesson, we are going to be creating the start button, having a message area for some instructions. So when the game starts, the elements are going to be clickable. When you click the element, they're going to change in opacity, and they're going to drop down from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen. And that's going to be setting up our basic gameplay, and then we can add in the additional gameplay in the upcoming lesson. Creating some interactive elements. So first off, we've got a div, and this is going to be our main container element where we're going to add all the elements into it, and we're going to be selecting it using the JavaScript. So setting up a variable called container, and then using the document query select and selecting the element with a class of container. And that will select that as the main element that we can create the interaction of the gameplay for that element. And just to make sure that we do have it ready to go, I'm outputting it into the console, and we can see it there being output into the console. So we want to create some elements on the page. I'm going to create a function that's going to handle making elements, so it'll just be called maker, and this is going to provide us an easy way that we can create elements on the page and add them into the main container. I'm also going to update this, and I'm going to just call it main, get rid of the console message. So this is going to be where our main gameplay area is. That's the parent object to all of the elements. So we are going to need to have a message area, and when we have an area for the message, so just call it message. And using the maker function, let's create an element, and we're going to attach it to main. So first parameter that we're passing into the function, and this is going to be the parent where we're attaching the element into. Next is going to be the element type, so this is going to be a string value, and we want to create a div, so this is going to be just the type. So now we have enough information to create the element and attach it to the parent, and we can pass in some other parameters into the function maker in order to dynamically create elements on the fly. So using the document and then create element, and the element that we're creating is going to be coming from the variable of t, and then we're returning back the element using the parent object and append child, appending the element to the parent. So that will return back that newly created element, and then we can use the console log to log out the result for message. So now that element should be added to the page. Go into the elements, and within the container, there's our newly created element sitting within the container. So we're ready to apply some properties to it and make some changes to it. So also I want to be able to pass in some values here. So click start button. So this is just the instructions for the user, and I'm going to call this as HTML, and then as we're creating the element, we'll update the inner HTML with whatever we have for HTML. So that will give the user some instructions on what the next step is. We also need to now next create the button. So this is going to be the start button, and I'll just call it button 1. And we can use the maker function again, attach the button to main. Element type that we're creating is going to be a button, and on the button we're just going to write start game. So there's our start game button. Now let's attach an event listener to the button. So this is going to be where we're going to be creating and setting up the entire game object. So this is the click event, and whenever this gets clicked, this is where we're going to run the start game function. I'm actually going to give it a named function so that we can identify it, and it'll be called start game. And then once the button gets clicked, this is where we're going to kick off the start of the gameplay. So what we want to do is we want to hide the button. So button 1 style, and set the display. So we're going to be hiding the button. So that's one of the first things that we want to do. And we also want to update the message. So set the message and text content of the message. So we're just setting up these element properties. Game in play. So we click the start button, we get game in play. Let's also update some of the elements where we can apply some styling to the elements, so to make it look a little bit better, and create our game board area. And first off, let's set up the box sizing, and we're going to set that to border box so that we can take up all the available space. We'll select the element with a class of container and set a width for that one. And we'll do a 90 vertical width, and also set the margin to be auto, so that will center the element. And we can do a background color of the element so that we can distinguish it from the rest of the page. So that will create this type of effect. Let's also do a height for the element, and I'm going to set it up as a minimum height. So we want to have a minimum gameplay height of 600 pixels. So that creates this element here. I've got it zoomed in, so let me zoom it back out. So we get the full size there of 600 pixels. And actually I'm going to set this up to be max height of 600 pixels. Or actually minimum height, and we'll set it to be 400 pixels. So it's slightly smaller, so it'll fit nicely within the game area. Also within the container, let's set the text align, and we'll center align the text content. Next, let's update the elements, and as we're creating them, we can also add in one more where we can set up a class. So we'll set C for class, and that will give us a way, as we're making the elements, to easily apply some classes to those elements. So this is going to get the button class, and that one's going to get the message class. And then when we create the element using class list, we add the class coming from the variable of C. So that allows us to select the elements such as the message area. And for this one, let's set up some padding around there. It's 10 pixels of padding, and set a background color, so to distinguish that from the rest of the background. So that gives us our little message area there where we've got the font, and we can update some of the fonts afterwards. So let's select the button, and I'll set up the minimum width to be 50% for it. So that will make the button a little bit bigger. Set the height of the button and 40 pixels, and of course you can change these as needed. Update the font size 1.4 EM. So that would give us a slightly bigger button. Also the border radius, and I'll slightly round the button borders. So that gives us this type of effect for the button, and we can just go ahead and we can save that. So now we've got a button to start the game. We're ready to have the gameplay take effect. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a paddle that's going to be going back and forth, and then we're going to create some dynamic elements at the top, and these elements are going to be clickable, and when they get clicked, they're going to drop down from the top. So these are going to be having a class of box, and let's set up the position of the element and set that up as absolute. So setting it as absolute, and I'm going to set the main container to have a position of relative. So these boxes that we're going to create, they're going to be dynamically generated, and they're also going to be clickable. So position them absolute, and then set them up at position of left 0, and we're going to adjust this with code. So it actually doesn't matter what values we're putting in here, as when we do create these elements, we're going to adjust them using the code. So let's create a bunch of elements when we start the game. And we're going to create a function that's going to be the init function. So this is going to be essentially a function that's going to run whenever the DOM content has loaded. So on the window object, add event listener, and the event that we're listening for is DOM content loaded. So this is going to invoke the function init whenever the DOM content has loaded, and within the init, this is where we can create the game elements. So let's create an object, and I'm going to just call it game. And within the game object, this is where we're going to create the boxes. So right now, boxes is just going to be a blank array, and then we're going to create a bunch of them, and the number of boxes that we want to create. So set that up dynamically, and this is essentially how many boxes we're going to have dynamically generating at the top. So up to a max of 15. So let's generate those elements, and we're going to add them into the box array. So creating a loop, so let I equal 0, and loop through while I is less than, and this is where we've got the dynamic number of game num. Increment I by 1, so that will allow us to create a bunch of these elements, and we're going to be simply attaching them to main. So let's select these elements, and we're going to attach them to main. I'm also going to set up a height for these elements and also a width of them. So we'll do it at 30 pixels, and then of course we can adjust it if we want it slightly bigger. I'm also going to do the line height of the element and set the line height of it to be 30 pixels. So that way we can center the text and text align. So we'll center align the text content. So I'm going to give numbers on each one of these elements that we're creating. So as we're generating it, let's create the element. And the elements that we're going to be creating is coming from the maker, added into the main object. These are all going to be divs. And the content for these is going to be the value of I plus 1. And then the last item is going to be the class that we're going to be adding. So it's going to be the box. So there we go. We've got a bunch of boxes that are created on the screen. And let's make it slightly bigger. So make them 50 pixels. So there's our box elements that have a class that have the text content one on top of the other. Let's set a background color for the element. And we're going to generate this actually. Let's generate this randomly. So we have random background colors for the elements. So as we've got the element using the style property and then the background color value, we can generate a random color value for the elements. And this is done using JavaScript math random. And I'll open this up within the console so that we can show you how you can generate the random hex value. So using math random is going to return back a number from 0 to just before 1. So 0 decimal, and then these are all random. So every time you do math random, you're going to get a different result. And we want to take that result from math random and convert it into a string. And if we use toString16, that's going to convert it into a hex value. So now we're getting a random hex value, but they're still starting with 0 decimal. And we want to return back 6 characters from that string that we've just generated. So in order to do that, we can use the string methods in JavaScript. And slice allows us to select a starting index and an ending index in order to return back a value. So now if we use this formula, we can generate a random hex value, which can be used as a color value. So going back into where we're generating these, we need to add in the hash in front of it and then generate the random value for the background color. So now they're all going to have different background colors, and only the top one is going to be showing right now. Because we also want to be hiding them as well. But right now we're just going to allow them to show as we're generating them. So let's also apply to the box. We'll hover the hover effect. So setting up the cursor, and I'm going to set the pointer, the cursor to pointer as we hover over it. Also for the box, let's set a border, and I'll update the border when we hover over it. So the border will just be a white border around it. And then as we hover over, let's set the border color, and I'll set the border color to be red. So when we hover over it, we get this type of effect. Let's also update the font. So make the font slightly bigger, and also going to update the color of the font so that it's easier to see. So now we've got a bunch of elements that are generated, and I want to be able to click on these elements, and that's what's going to make them drop from the top. So let's create that action where we're going to create the dropping action from the top, and then we can also add in the event listener here. So on click, and whenever the element gets clicked, then it's going to drop. So we can also just create a function called dropper. So this is going to actually invoke the element to drop, and we can update its property values, so its style property values for where it's located off the top. So when it's clicked, for now, I'll just output the element into the console when it does get clicked. So clear the console, and we click it, we're selecting the element with the 15 on it. So that's the element that's being selected. So once we've got the element in play, then we can apply some styling properties to it. And one of them is I want to add in a class to the element. So using class list, I'm going to add a class, and the class that I'm adding is going to be active. So when it is active, that means it's going to be dropping, it's going to be moving. And let's do one more here we'll add in opacity and set the opacity at 0.5. So that we'll be able to see through the elements. And then once they get clicked and once they get the active class added to it. So the active class, let's update first off the border color. So the border will then be black. So set up a black border for them when they're active, and opacity, I'm going to set the opacity. So when I click it, it gets a black border and it loses its opacity. And it also gets the active class. So we want to add in a way to be able to do the movement. And with JavaScript, it comes with a requestAnimationFrame. So we can set up the requestAnimationFrame, and when the game is in play, then we can launch the function for the animation. So let's create a function that can handle, and we'll call this function mover. And what this function will do is it's going to use the requestAnimationFrame function in order to continue an animation. And I'm going to set this up within the game object. So this is going to be the animation frame. So right now it'll just be a blank object. And then once we click mover for the game Annie, and once we're assigned it to a variable, the reason I'm assigning it to variable, you can also remove the animation frame if you have a reference for a variable for it. So request animation frame, and what this will do is this will continuously run the same function. So this is going to be running the mover function. And once we click start the game, the mover function is going to get invoked. So the mover function is ready, and within the mover function, this is where we're going to select the elements that have a class of active. So this is just going to list out all the active elements. So using the document and query selector all, select all the elements with a class of active, and then we're going to loop through these and update their positions. So using for each, selecting out the element, and then here's where we're going to do the actual movement of the elements and increment their value. So whatever their top value is, we're going to increment it. So we want to be able to select the top values of the elements, and we can do that getting the element, and the property offset top will return back the position off the top of the element. So let's start the game, and then within the console, when we click it, give us the position off the top for the element. So we can take that value and get the temporary value, and this is actually going to be the y coordinate value for the element, and the x is going to stay the same. So we can get that value, and that's going to return back a numeric value. So we can take the value of y and we can increment it. So adding to the value, and then whatever we want for the speed. So let's set that dynamically, and we can set the speed at 5. So we'll do an increment of that value and adding it from the game speed. So that will increment that value, and we can set this now to the element using the style top value and then y plus, because it's expecting a string value for the number of picks that we want it down. So now when we click it, that's going to give us this falling effect for the element. So we want to also check to see if the value of the offset top is going to be past a certain value, and if it is, then we want to remove it off the screen and we want to stop the action of it. So let's do that, where we're going to take the active and we're going to remove out that active. So do a condition to check to see if y, and if y is greater than the height of the main page element. So that's where we've got the minimum height of 400 pixels. And if it's greater than 400 pixels, then we want to remove the element from the screen. So we want to take the element using class list, remove the active class, and so that will stop it from moving essentially. So start the game, press the button, and once it reaches down here, then it's going to stop the action of moving. If we take the container and if we update the overflow to hidden, that's going to hide all of the elements that fall out of the page. So it's going to make them look like that they're disappearing. And we also want to hide the ones in the top position as well. And we only want to bring them into play when they're ready to go. So now that this element is down at the bottom, we can also set that back up into a part where we're going to be adding it again into play. And we can take care of that later on in this lesson. So right now we do have the elements, and we click Start Game, and we can click the elements, and that's going to make the elements drop from the top. And now they're all sitting there. The overflow is hidden. That's where the elements are sitting. So they're all sitting down there at the bottom of the screen. So coming up next, we're going to make the paddle, or the basket that's going to be catching the elements. And then we also want to place them randomly within the page area. And this is going to be responsive, so they can go anywhere depending on what the screen width is. So we need to be able to provide a random way to position them within the available screen area of the container. So all of that is coming up in the upcoming lesson. So go ahead and create your main game container, set up some elements that can be interacted with, and you'll be ready to move on to the next lesson.